Ambassador Velthan stood at the viewport of her diplomatic vessel and watched the stars drift past like scattered diamonds on black velvet, her crystalline body catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the walls of her private chamber. She had been preparing for this mission for 40 rotations. And now that the moment had finally arrived, she felt something that her species rarely experienced. Fear. The Kreth Dominion had rejected 17 peace proposals over the last century, their warlords laughing at every diplomatic envoy that the Galactic Council had sent their way. And 3 ambassadors had been returned to their homeworlds in pieces, their bodies broken as a message to anyone who dared approach the Kreth with talk of treaties and cooperation. But Velthan was different from those who had come before her, and she had done something that no other ambassador had ever considered doing. She had hired a human. The door to her chamber slid open with a soft hiss, and Marcus Cole stepped inside, his boots making quiet sounds against the metal floor as he entered and stood at attention. Before her, he was not particularly tall by the standards of his own species, standing only 6 feet in height, and his build was athletic, but not imposing in the way that the massive Kreth warriors were imposing, with their 8 feet of scaled muscle and their claws that could tear through starship hull plating. But there was something about him that made Velthan's crystalline form vibrate with an emotion she could not quite name. "You wanted to see me, Ambassador," Marcus said, and his voice was calm and steady, carrying none of the nervousness that Velthan herself was struggling to hide. "Yes," she replied, turning away from the viewport to face him fully. "I wanted to discuss what awaits us when we arrive at the Kreth homeworld, and I want to make sure that you understand exactly what you have agreed to do." Marcus nodded once, a simple gesture that humans use to indicate understanding, and he clasped his hands behind his back in a posture that seemed relaxed, but somehow ready for anything. "The Kreth are dangerous," Velthan continued, her voice carrying a slight tremor that she could not control. "They evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them, and they became the apex predators of their planet by being more violent and more ruthless than anything else that lived there." "I have read the briefing materials," Marcus said. "Reading about them and standing in front of them are 2 very different things," Velthan replied, and she moved closer to the human, studying his face for any sign of the fear that she expected to find there. "Their warlord, Grathnak, has personally killed over 1,000 enemies in combat, and he takes pleasure in breaking those who oppose him." Marcus met her gaze without flinching, and his eyes held a steadiness that Velthan found both comforting and slightly unsettling. "With respect, Ambassador," he said, "I have faced dangerous situations before, and I would not have accepted this assignment if I did not believe I could fulfill my duties." Velthan tilted her head, a gesture that her species used to express curiosity, and she studied the human standing before her with new interest. "Why did you accept this assignment?" she asked. "The payment is good, but it is not worth dying for, and many believe that anyone who accompanies me to the Kreth homeworld will not return alive." Marcus was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Velthan pay close attention to every word. "I accepted because someone has to," he said. "The Kreth have been terrorizing the outer colonies for decades, and every year they grow bolder, raiding settlements and taking slaves from species that cannot defend themselves. And if someone does not find a way to make peace with them, the war that comes will kill millions." He paused, and something flickered in his eyes that Velthan could not quite identify. "Humans know what war looks like," he continued. "We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years, and we have learned that peace, even an imperfect peace, is better than the alternative, and if my presence here can help you achieve that peace, then the risk is worth taking." Velthan felt something shift inside her crystalline form, a warmth that spread through her being as she looked at this strange creature from a small blue world on the edge of the galaxy. She had hired him because humans had a reputation, because the stories that circulated through the galactic community spoke of a species that refused to stay down, that kept fighting long after any reasonable being would have surrendered, that turned their own fragile bodies into weapons through sheer determination and refusal to accept defeat. But standing here with Marcus, she began to understand that there was more to humanity than just their capacity for violence. "We will arrive at the Kreth homeworld in 6 hours," she said finally. "I suggest you rest and prepare yourself for what is to come." Marcus nodded again and turned to leave. But he paused at the door and looked back at her. "Ambassador," he said, "I want you to know that whatever happens down there, I will not let them harm you. And I will do whatever is necessary to ensure that you have the chance to complete your mission." And then he was gone, the door sliding shut behind him. And Velthan was alone with her thoughts and her fears, and a small spark of hope that she had not felt in a very long time. She turned back to the viewport and watched the stars. And somewhere in the distance, growing larger with every passing moment, was the Kreth homeworld. A planet of predators and warriors who had never known defeat, but they had never faced a human before. Velthan allowed herself a small smile, a gesture she had learned from studying human behavior, and she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this mission would be different from all the others that had come before. The ship flew on through the endless dark, carrying its precious cargo toward destiny. And Ambassador Velthan of the Cerulean Collective prepared herself for the most important negotiation of her life. She did not know what would happen when they arrived, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Marcus Cole would be at her side. And that knowledge gave her the courage to face whatever was waiting for them. The stars continued their eternal dance outside the viewport, and the ship carried them forward into the unknown. The shuttle descended through the blood-red clouds of the Kreth homeworld, and Marcus Cole watched through the small viewport as the alien landscape revealed itself. Beneath, the mountains of black volcanic rock stretched toward the crimson sky, and vast plains of dark soil spread between them like wounds in the flesh of the world. And everywhere he looked, Marcus could see the signs of a civilization built on conquest, and war fortresses dotted the landscape, their walls bristling with weapons, and military vehicles moved across the plains in formations that spoke of constant readiness for battle. And the cities themselves looked more like armed camps than places where beings lived and raised their young. "Beautiful, is it not?" a voice said beside him. And Marcus turned to find Ambassador Velthan watching him with what he had learned to recognize as concern. "It tells me a lot about who we are dealing with," Marcus replied. And he made sure his voice carried no fear or hesitation, only calm observation. The shuttle touched down on a landing platform that jutted out from the side of the largest fortress Marcus had ever seen. A massive structure of black stone and metal that rose so high into the sky that its upper levels disappeared into the red clouds. Above, armed Kreth warriors lined the platform, their scaled bodies covered in ceremonial armor that did nothing to hide the deadly claws that tipped their four-fingered hands. And their four eyes tracked the shuttle's descent with the focused attention of predators, watching prey enter their territory. Marcus was the first to step out of the shuttle, positioning himself between the Kreth warriors and the doorway through which Ambassador Velthan would emerge. And he felt every alien eye on the platform turned toward him. The Kreth were massive, each warrior standing at least 7 feet tall, with thick scales that ranged in color from dark green to almost black. And their faces were dominated by snouts filled with razor-sharp teeth that they made no effort to hide. But Marcus had faced dangerous situations before, and he had learned long ago that showing fear to predators only encouraged them. He stood at ease, his hands clasped behind his back, and he met the gaze of the nearest warrior without flinching or looking away. The warrior's 4 eyes narrowed, and something that might have been surprise flickered across his alien features before he looked away and focused on the shuttle behind. Marcus Ambassador Velthin emerged a moment later, her crystalline form catching the dim red light and scattering it in patterns that drew startled looks from several of the Kreth warriors. And she moved to stand beside Marcus with a grace that belied the fear he knew she was feeling. "Welcome to Kreth Prime," a deep voice rumbled from the far end of the platform. And the warriors parted to reveal the largest Kreth that Marcus had ever seen. Warlord Grathnak stood 8 feet tall, and his body was covered in scars that told the story of a lifetime spent in combat. And his scales were so dark, they seemed to absorb the light around him rather than reflecting. I wore no armor, only a simple harness that held various weapons and trophies. And his 4 eyes studied the diplomatic delegation with an expression of open contempt. "Ambassador Velthin of the Cerulean Collective," Velthin said, and her voice was steady despite the tremor that Marcus could see running through her crystalline form. "I bring greetings from the Galactic Council and their hopes for a peaceful resolution to the current tensions between our peoples." Grathnak made a sound that might have been laughter, a deep rumbling that vibrated through the platform and made several of the warriors bare their teeth in what Marcus recognized as amusement. "The council sends another messenger to beg for peace," the warlord said. "How many is this now? 17, 18. I've lost count of how many of your kind have stood where you stand now." He stepped forward, and his massive clawed feet made the metal platform shake with each step. "And I have lost count of how many I have sent back in pieces." Grathnak stopped directly in front of the delegation, his huge form towering over both Velthin and Marcus. And his 4 eyes moved from the ambassador to the human standing beside her. Something changed in the warlord's expression as he studied Marcus, and his nostrils flared as he drew in the human scent. "You bring a pet to these negotiations," Grathnak said, and his voice carried a note of genuine curiosity beneath the contempt. "One of the soft-skinned ones from the edge of the galaxy. We have heard stories about your kind." Marcus said nothing, but he held the warlord's gaze without looking away, and he kept his posture relaxed and ready. "They say you die easily," Grathnak continued, leaning closer until his snout was only inches from Marcus's face. "They say your bones break like dried twigs and your skin tears like wet paper. They say you are the weakest species in the known galaxy." "With respect, warlord," Velthin interjected, "you may have heard incorrectly." Grathnak turned his attention back to the ambassador, but Marcus noticed that the warlord's eyes kept drifting back to him, studying him with an intensity that spoke of something more than simple curiosity. "We shall see," Grathnak said finally. "The Hall of Conquered Banners has been prepared for our meeting. Follow me and try not to break anything with your fragile bodies." He turned and walked toward the fortress, and the warriors formed up around the delegation in a formation that was part honor guard and part prisoner escort. As they walked through the massive gates and into the fortress itself, Marcus took note of everything around him: the placement of the guards, the layout of the corridors, the locations of doors and windows and potential escape routes. The Hall of Conquered Banners was exactly what its name suggested: a vast chamber lined with the flags and symbols of species that the Kreth had defeated and subjugated over the centuries. And Marcus recognized several of them from his briefing materials. The Kreth wanted them to feel small and afraid, wanted them to understand that they were walking into the den of the galaxy's most feared warriors. But Marcus had walked into dangerous places before, and he had walked out of all of them. He would walk out of this one too, and he would make sure that Ambassador Velthin walked out beside him. The warlord took his seat at the far end of the hall, and the negotiations were about to begin. The Hall of Conquered Banners fell silent as Warlord Grathnak raised one massive clawed hand, and every Kreth warrior in the chamber turned their attention toward their leader with the discipline of soldiers. who had spent their entire lives following his command's ambassador. Velthan had been speaking for nearly an hour, presenting the terms of the treaty that the Galactic Council hoped would bring peace between the Kreth Dominion and the rest of the galaxy. But Marcus could see that the warlord was growing impatient with words. The Kreth were not a species that valued negotiation. They valued strength. And no amount of carefully crafted diplomatic language was going to change that fundamental truth about who they were. Enough, Grathnak growled, and his voice echoed through the vast chamber like thunder rolling across a stormy sky. Your words are soft and weak, just like your bodies, and I grow tired of listening to them. Velthan stopped speaking, and Marcus could see the frustration and fear warring in her crystalline features. Warlord, she said, I understand that my words may seem insufficient, but the treaty I offer would bring great benefits to your people. Trade routes and resources, and we take what we need, Grathnak interrupted. That is the Kreth way, and it has served us well for 10,000 years. Why should we change now because some crystal creature asks nicely? He stood from his throne, and his massive form seemed to fill the entire end of the hall. But perhaps there is a way to make these negotiations more interesting, he said, and a cruel smile spread across his scaled features. Kreth tradition demands that all matters of importance be settled by a demonstration of strength. A challenge between champions. Velthan's crystalline form flickered with what Marcus recognized as panic. Warlord, I am a diplomat, not a warrior. And I? Then your pet will fight for you, Grathnak said. And he gestured toward Marcus with one clawed hand. Let us see if the stories about humans are true. Let us see if they really do die as easily as they say. A warrior stepped forward from the ranks of Kreth soldiers, and Marcus recognized him immediately from the briefing materials he had studied on the journey. Arakethra was the warlord's personal champion, a scarred veteran who had won 60 arena battles against the finest warriors the galaxy had to offer, and his body was a roadmap of violence, covered in scars from claws and blades and weapons that Marcus could not even identify. The warrior was 7.5 feet tall, and his scales were the color of dried blood, and when he smiled, his teeth looked like they could bite through steel. I will try not to kill him too quickly, Kethra said, and laughter rippled through the assembled Kreth warriors. Marcus stepped forward before Velthan could object, and he began removing his diplomatic jacket, folding it neatly and handing it to the ambassador. Hold this, please, he said quietly. I would hate to get blood on it. Velthan took the jacket with trembling hands, and her crystalline eyes were wide with fear as she looked up at him. Marcus, you cannot do this, she whispered. He will kill you. He has killed warriors twice your size. Marcus smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Velthan's fear shift into something else. Something that she could not quite name. Trust me, Ambassador, he said. I know what I'm doing. He walked into the center of the hall, and the Kreth warriors formed a circle around him and Kethra, their 4 eyes gleaming with anticipation for the violence that was about to unfold. Kethra circled Marcus slowly, his movements fluid and predatory, and his claws scraped against the stone floor with a sound like knives being sharpened. I have killed many softskins, the champion said. They all begged for mercy at the end. Will you beg too, human? Marcus did not respond. He simply watched and waited, his body relaxed but ready. Kethra lunged. The Kreth champion was fast, faster than anything his size had any right to be, and his claws slashed toward Marcus's throat with enough force to tear through bone. But Marcus was not there. He had moved the instant Kethra committed to the attack, stepping to the side with a fluid grace that made the massive warrior's claws slice through empty air. And before Kethra could recover, Marcus was behind him. The human's hands moved with surgical precision, grabbing the warrior's arm and twisting it in a direction that the joint was never designed to go. and Marcus applied pressure with all of his body weight behind it. The crack echoed through the silent hall. Cathara screamed, a sound of pure agony that no one in the hall had ever heard the champion make. And he fell to his knees as Marcus maintained his grip on the broken arm. The entire fight had lasted 11 seconds. Marcus released the whimpering warrior and stepped back, his breathing slightly elevated but otherwise showing no signs of exertion. And he straightened his shirt with the calm precision of someone who had just finished a minor task. Every Kreth in the hall was staring at him with expressions that ranged from shock to disbelief to something that looked very much like fear. Ambassador Velthan would like to discuss the treaty now, Marcus said, his voice calm and steady in the stunned silence. If that is acceptable, Grathnak had not moved from his throne, but his 4 eyes were fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made the air in the hall feel thick and heavy. The warlord looked at his fallen champion, still writhing on the floor and clutching his shattered arm, and then he looked back at the human who had defeated him in less time than it took to draw a breath. How? Grathnak asked, and his voice carried none of the contempt it had held before, only genuine confusion and the beginnings of something that might have been respect. Marcus met the warlord's gaze without flinching. I would be happy to explain, he said, after we have discussed the treaty. The hall remained silent, and for the first time in living memory, the Kreth Dominion had witnessed something that challenged everything they believed about the galaxy and their place in it. They had seen a human fight, and they were beginning to understand why the rest of the galaxy whispered about Earth with fear in their voices. The negotiations had been paused for a meal break, and Marcus stood alone on a balcony that overlooked the volcanic plains of the Kreth homeworld. Watching the red sun sink toward the jagged horizon, he had expected the warlord to come, and he was not surprised when he heard the heavy footsteps approaching from behind. Grathnak moved to stand beside him at the railing, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the alien sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and orange. My healers say that Kethra will never fight again, the warlord said finally, and his voice carried no anger, only a strange sort of curiosity. You destroyed his arm in a way that even our best medical technology cannot repair. Marcus nodded but said nothing. He was my finest warrior, Grathnak continued. He had defeated champions from 17 different species, and you beat him in the time it takes me to blink. How is that possible? Marcus turned to face the massive alien, and he considered his words carefully before speaking. Do you know what a persistence predator is? Warlord. Grathnak's 4 eyes narrowed, and he shook his massive head. I do not. Marcus leaned against the railing and looked back out at the volcanic landscape on my world. Millions of years ago, our ancestors developed a hunting strategy that was different from any other predator on the planet. He began. They were not the fastest creatures, and they were not the strongest. And they did not have claws or fangs or venom to bring down their prey. He paused, letting the words sink in. So instead of trying to catch their prey in a single burst of speed, they followed it, they walked after it, hour after hour, day after day, never stopping, never resting, until the prey animal simply collapsed from exhaustion and gave up. Grathnak was silent, his 4 eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that showed he was listening carefully to every word. We evolved to never stop. Marcus continued. Our bodies are designed to keep going long after any other creature would have given up. We sweat to cool ourselves so we do not overheat. Our joints are built to absorb impact so we can keep walking on damaged legs. Our minds are wired to push through pain and exhaustion and fear because stopping meant death. He turned to face the warlord directly. Your people look at us and see a soft species with no natural weapons. And you wonder how we survived on our world. And the answer is simple. We did not survive despite our weaknesses. We survived because we refused to accept them. Marcus held up his hands, showing his blunt fingernails and soft skin. We had no claws, so we made weapons. We had no armor, so we made shields. We had no venom, so we made poisons. And when those things were not enough, we made better ones and then better ones after that, until we had weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. Grathnak shifted uncomfortably, and Marcus saw something in the warlord's eyes that he had not expected to see, a flicker of genuine fear. We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years, Marcus said. Every weapon you have ever seen, every tactic you have ever used, every cruelty you have ever imagined, we invented them all centuries ago. And then we invented countermeasures. And then we invented ways to defeat those countermeasures. And on in an endless cycle of war. He stepped closer to the warlord. And despite the massive size difference between them, it was Grathnak who seemed to shrink back. Your species evolved on a death world, Warlord, a planet where everything was trying to kill you. And you became the apex predators by being more violent than anything else that lived there. Marcus smiled. And there was no warmth in it. Earth is a death world too. And we became the apex predators by being more creative about violence than any species has the right to be. We did not just learn to kill. We turned killing into a science. We industrialized death. We wrote books about the most efficient ways to break bodies and minds. Grathnak was very still, and his 4 eyes were wide with an emotion that looked very much like the fear that prey animals felt when they realized they were not alone. But here is the thing that makes humanity truly dangerous, Marcus said, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. We learned to stop. The warlord blinked in confusion. We spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. And then we looked at what we had created, and we decided that there had to be a better way. We learned that peace, even an imperfect peace, was more valuable than all the victories in the galaxy. Marcus turned away and looked back out at the sunset. Ambassador Velthan is offering you peace, Warlord. She is offering you a chance to stop the cycle of violence before it consumes your people, the way it almost consumed mine. He glanced back at Grathnak. I suggest you take it. The warlord was silent for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than Marcus had ever heard it. And if I refuse, he asked. If I decide that the Kreth way is the only way, Marcus met his gaze steadily, then I will show you why the rest of the galaxy calls Earth a death world too. And I will make sure that every Kreth who survives understands exactly what happens when humanity stops being peaceful. The red sun touched the horizon and began to sink below it, and the sky darkened around them like blood fading from an old wound. The treaty, Grathnak said finally. I will look at it again. With fresh eyes, Marcus nodded once. That is all we ask. The warlord turned and walked back into the fortress, and Marcus stayed on the balcony, watching the last light fade from the alien sky. He hoped that Grathnak would choose peace. He truly did, but if the warlord chose war instead, Marcus was ready for that too. Humans always were. The morning sun rose over the Kreth homeworld, painting the volcanic landscape in shades of deep red and burning orange. And Ambassador Velthan stood in the Hall of Conquered Banners with her heart pounding so hard that she could feel her crystalline form vibrating with each beat. She had barely slept the night before, tossing and turning on the uncomfortable bed that the Kreth had provided. Running through every possible outcome of this day in her mind, Marcus stood beside her, calm and still as always, his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes watching everything and everyone in the massive chamber. The Kreth warriors who lined the walls seemed different this morning, their postures less aggressive and their eyes less contemptuous than they had been the day before. And Velthan wondered how many of them had heard about what happened to Kethroth. Champion himself was nowhere to be seen. probably still in the medical bay, having his shattered arm treated by healers who had no idea how to fix what Marcus had done to it. The great doors at the end of the hall swung open, and Warlord Grathnak entered, his massive form moving with a grace that seemed impossible for a creature of his size. But something was different about him this morning. Too, the contempt that had radiated from him like heat from a fire was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful, more careful. And when his four eyes found Marcus standing beside the ambassador, there was respect in them that had not been there before. "Ambassador Velthan," the warlord said, and his voice echoed through the hall without the mocking tone it had carried yesterday. "I have reviewed the treaty that you brought, and I have considered the words that your humans spoke to me last night." Velthan held her breath, and she could feel Marcus shift slightly beside her, ready for whatever came next. The Kreth have always believed that strength is the only thing that matters. Grathnak continued. "We believe that the weak exist to serve the strong, and that peace is just another word for surrender." He paused, and his four eyes swept across the assembled warriors who watched in silence. "But your humans showed me something yesterday. He showed me that strength comes in many forms, and that the species we dismissed as soft and weak may be the most dangerous predators in the galaxy." Grathnak stepped forward, and Velthan had to fight the urge to step back as his massive form loomed over her. "More importantly," the warlord said, "he showed me that the truly strong are the ones who choose when to fight and when to make peace. And that takes a different kind of strength than we have ever known." He turned to the Kreth scribe who stood waiting by the tree table. A large document spread across its surface with spaces for signatures and seals. "The Kreth Dominion will sign this treaty," Grathnak announced, and a murmur ran through the assembled warriors. "We will end our raids on the outer colonies, and we will open trade negotiations with the Galactic Council." Velthan felt tears forming in her crystalline eyes, an emotional response that her species rarely experienced, and she had to take a moment to compose herself before she could speak. "Thank you, Warlord," she said, and her voice trembled with emotion. "You have made a choice today that will save countless lives on both sides." Grathnak nodded, but he held up one clawed hand before moving toward the treaty table. "I have one condition," he said. "One addition to the terms that your council proposed." Velthan felt her hope waver, wondering what demand the warlord would make that might undo everything they had accomplished. "I want to establish a military exchange program with the humans," Grathnak said, and his four eyes moved to Marcus. "I want my warriors to train with your people, to learn how you fight, to understand how a species with no claws and no scales and no natural weapons became the most feared predators in the known galaxy." Marcus raised an eyebrow, and Velthan saw a small smile cross his features. "That can be arranged," he said, "though I should warn you that human training methods can be quite intense." Grathnak bared his teeth in what Velthan had learned to recognize as a Kreth smile. "Good," he said. "My warriors have grown soft. They need a challenge." The treaty was signed within the hour, with both Grathnak and Velthan adding their marks to the document that would reshape the balance of power in the Kofur galaxy as the diplomatic delegation prepared to depart. Velthan found Marcus standing at a viewport in the docking bay, watching the Kreth homeworld spread out beneath them. "You saved countless lives today," she said. Moving to stand beside him, "The council will want to know how you did it, how you convinced the most stubborn warlord in the galaxy to sign a peace treaty in less than 2 days." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant as he watched the volcanic plains and dark fortresses shrink beneath them. "I did not convince him of anything," he said finally. "I just showed him the truth about what humanity is, and I let him make his own choice." Velthan tilted her head in the gesture of curiosity that was natural to her species. "And if he had chosen differently?" she asked. "If he had decided to fight instead of signing the treaty, Marcus turned to face her. And there was something in his eyes that made her crystalline form shiver. Then, I would have shown him what humanity becomes when we are forced to fight, he said. And I would have made sure that the Kreth remembered that lesson for 1,000 years. He smiled then, and the coldness faded from his eyes, replaced by warmth and something that looked like hope. But he chose peace, Marcus continued. And that is always the better outcome, for everyone. The shuttle lifted away from the Kreth homeworld and began its journey back to Council space, carrying with it a signed treaty that no one had believed was possible. Ambassador Velfin made a note in her personal log that evening, a recommendation that would eventually become standard policy for diplomatic missions throughout the galaxy. Future negotiations with hostile species should include human security personnel, not just for protection from external threats, but to remind all parties what humanity is capable of and what they choose not to do. The treaty with the Kreth Dominion held for 300 years, the longest peace that the warlike species had ever known. And in the centuries that followed, whenever the Kreth spoke of humans, they did so with something that they had never felt for any other species in the fund galaxy respect, because they had seen what a single human could do. And they understood that somewhere out there, on a small blue world on the edge of the galaxy, there were billions more just like him. The Kreth had learned that some prey was not worth hunting. The stars wheeled slowly past the viewport, and Marcus Cole smiled as he watched them, content in the knowledge that today, at least, peace at one tomorrow might bring new challenges and new dangers. But that was a problem for tomorrow for now. The galaxy was a little bit safer, and that was enough.